Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. I'm your host, Danny Nierenberg. Every Monday, I get a chance to talk to food system business leaders who are changing the way that we eat, hopefully for the better. And there's no doubt that the rise of alternative meats have really made a place at the table, so to speak, especially over the last year. According to the Good Food Institute, plant-based meats in 2020 were at record highs with $4.2 billion in sales, up from about $3.4 billion in 2019. And what we've seen less of in this space, but is now growing, is the rise of alternative seafood. The conventional seafood industry has had an array of problems, from actual fraud, not getting the kind of fish that you think you're buying, to slavery, and of course, unsustainable fishing practices, which are harming parts of our oceans. It's an industry that's really ripe for disruption and change for the better in lots of creative ways. And that's why I'm excited to talk to Michelle Wolf, the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer, that's a mouthful, at New Wave Foods. New Wave Foods released its plant-based shrimp alternative to food service companies across the country just a few months ago in March. Michelle is the co-founder of New Wave and is a former engineer with consumer packaged goods experience at L'Oreal, which we'll talk about in a minute, with a degree from Carnegie Mellon. Her bio says that her work lives at the intersection of her scientific knowledge and her passion for protecting the oceans. Michelle was also recently honored in Forbes 30 under 30 food and drink list. Michelle, what a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Danny. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of dive right in and tell us a little bit about, what we like to hear from founders is really their origin story. And what I'm, kind of really interested in is that huge shift away from L'Oreal to working on plant-based shrimp.
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my background is in material science and engineering. And I always had this passion throughout school and throughout work I did for food and food technology and how we can kind of empower people in their everyday lives to make better choices that can ultimately impact our broader environment and human health. So I, just through schooling, found my way into L'Oreal and was trying to figure out what kind of impact that I was having there. And shampoo wasn't quite doing it for me. So I decided to move out to San Francisco and be at the epicenter of the plant-based movement, because this was about 5 or 6 years ago, and Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods were starting to gain a lot of traction within the market, but no one was quite looking at seafood, at least in the way we are now. And I thought I was going to be working for one of those plant-based companies. I ended up founding one. We worked through a few different concepts whenever we were very early stage, but quickly figured out that shrimp is the most consumed seafood in the United States by about a factor of 2. And it also has some of the biggest issues from a supply chain standpoint. So from an impact standpoint and opportunity standpoint, we chose to go after shrimp as our first product for a plant-based seafood product.
And so can you talk a little bit more about why conventional shrimp, the shrimp are so problematic?
Sure, absolutely. I like to kind of start off with a visual. If you think about the ocean, and like I was just on a hike recently and I looked out and I was just amazed at how vast it was. And I think that visual of the ocean, we kind of equated that to our seafood supply chain, where it was this endless supply that we could just keep pulling and pulling from. And we found just across the board within all types of seafood, we're overfishing. That endless supply isn't actually true. With shrimp specifically, since it is such a high demand product, we've had to resort to a lot of unsavory practices. So a lot of shrimp farming, a lot of shrimp in the US, about 90% is imported. And a lot of those imports come from the coast of Southeast Asia,
right,
where they take out whole mangroves from the side of the ocean, put these shrimp farms in, load it up with antibiotics and pesticides, and then the shelf life of those farms are only about 5 years. So then they move down the coastline and do the whole process all over again. And that has a tremendous impact in terms of greenhouse gas release. Shrimp, in terms of animal agriculture, have even been listed as number 3 in terms of greenhouse gas impact because of this kind of environmental destruction that happens. So there's a huge opportunity to provide an alternative way or just an alternative period to what happens over there. And then unfortunately, because of the pressures on that industry, we've seen things like human rights violations, even wild caught shrimp. There's issues with trawling and bycatch and kind of destruction of the ocean floor that happens there. So there's a lot of reason why we need to find alternatives for a lot of these practices happening in our ocean. And we see New Wave Food Shrimp as one of the solutions to help such systemic issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people sort of know a little bit about parts of what you mentioned, but the climate crisis, that the seafood industry is causing is I think, surprising to a lot of folks. And then, the effect on local fishers and local communities and the whole mangrove ecosystem that, supports those communities, it's really problematic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's some people, I don't want to discount people who are doing a good job, but when you think about mass farming, mass agriculture, those are the kinds of problems that we're trying to solve with New Wave Food Shrimp.
Absolutely. And we've talked to organizations and foundations that are working with local communities to make sure that mangroves are protected and that local fishers are protected and all of those things. So yeah, you're absolutely, sort of comparing two different kinds of and now with you, three different kinds of ways of producing a protein. It says that New Wave's ingredients are sustainably sourced. And you talked about all the unsavory practices that are inherent in industrial shrimp production. What makes your practices more savory, so to speak?
Sure, absolutely. Well, one, it's just taste. I think one of the things when we talk about sustainability, I believe you can't talk about even nutrition and sustainability without talking about taste, because I'm going to talk about the sustainability of some of our ingredients, but no matter how great the story is behind a product, we found time and time again, consumers don't come back to these products unless it tastes good. So we were focused on getting that shrimp texture right. And one of the ways we were able to do that was through a seaweed-derived ingredient. And I love seaweed because it's such a cool way that I think it connects our product back to the ocean as a sea plant. And what seaweed does is it sequesters carbon. There's a process where it takes up carbon, and all plants do this, but it does it at a much faster rate than row crops because it grows so quickly. So pulling out all of that CO2 that helps fight ocean acidification and helps fight climate change. And if we can incentivize or to increase the demand for products like New Wave Shrimp, which are down the supply chain of that, we can incentivize more beneficial agriculture for things like seaweed and disincentivize these harmful practices elsewhere in our supply chains.
Absolutely. It's definitely eating lower on the food chain in a really tasty way. And I'm glad you brought that up, especially around texture. This is not the 1970s or 1980s when, people who were interested in vegan or vegetarian foods sort of had to take what they could get and, eat without it always tasting that great or looking that great. And you've kind of solved for those problems.
Yes, so we were really focused, again, on getting the texture right. We actually worked with the Culinary Institute of America, and Certified Master Chef Brad Barnes was a really big part of showing us, shrimp actually has quite a range there with the different textures depending on where it's farmed, how it's been frozen and thawed, the species of it. So he helped us come up with this sort of texture standard that we should work for when we come up with a shrimp. And he literally told us if we didn't get the texture right, we wouldn't have had anything with this product. So that was sort of number one on our list. There's a lot of work to be done to figure out, what ingredients help with that. And that's how we came upon this seaweed derived ingredient, because shrimp are very particular in their texture, even compared to fin fish. The first bite almost has a snap to it, and the chew is very succulent. Things like fin fish, beef are much more striated. So we had a very specific texture target to go after as we were building this product. And then from there, we start to build in things like nutrition. We're using mung bean protein for that protein value that people are looking for in plant-based products. And also flavor. Flavor was an interesting challenge for us because you first have to define what does a shrimp taste like? And one of the things that we were having a hard time hitting, because we were able to get something at first that was very umami focused or had some seafood notes, but there was something about shrimp. We kept describing it as the fresh ocean flavor that we were trying to recreate in the product. And we actually turned back to seaweed and boiled things like kombu and other seafoods, because that really had that note that we were looking for, that fresh ocean note, and that helped us better define the texture. Oh, sorry, the flavor target.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the snap that, that shrimp has. How do you sort of account for that? And were you able to, I know Chef Brad from the Culinary Institute of America was helping you, but how did you test this on folks? Was it, how did that all work to get that kind of like, oh yeah, this is the shrimpiness that I want?
Sure. So it's a mixture of things. We always have sensory. So we had Chef Brad as part of the process. Our internal R&D panel constantly tasting and comparing to ocean shrimp, and then as the head of R&D, we also use analytical measurements to figure out, like, are we hitting the same snap, the same bite as some of the other, as in terms of ocean shrimp. So we also have a quantitative way to show, okay, yeah, we're on target. But the thing about it is, with food, the whole is always the greater than the sum of its parts. And it's so important to have the sensory evaluation complement that texture evaluation, because there's so much more going on in your mouth than you can always measure with a piece of equipment.
Absolutely. So, I remember the first time I tried an Impossible Burger. It was not buying it at a grocery store or even going through, I guess Burger King has them now. It was at a really nice restaurant event in New York. And so, like Impossible, you're first introducing New Wave shrimp to the food service industry, to restaurants who are, buying this in places like Massachusetts and New York, you mentioned before. And I'm sure that takes a little bit of awareness and education among the chefs at those restaurants to learn how to use this new product.
Yeah. So, yes and no. I think when we were designing the product, we certainly had to drive awareness of the product and get people to understand the benefits of having a plant-based shrimp on their menu, not only for our consumers looking for more plant-based options, but just the nutritional powerhouse that some plant-based products can be. But we were really cognizant to make sure that this product was going to be very versatile. Shrimp can be boiled, they're sauteed, they're fried. So we needed to develop these textures to be able to withstand all those cooking processes. So when an operator or a chef brings it into their kitchens, they're really able to use it just like you would ocean shrimp.
That's really interesting. Tell me what the product looks like. How does it arrive? It's frozen. Like, what kind of pound box is it in? Like, tell me a little bit more of what the chefs are working with right now.
Sure. So this is a fully food service product, and we wanted to be cognizant of, they're serving, a certain amount of servings. I'm so sorry. A certain amount of servings each day, and so we pack it in. It's 20 shrimp per bag. We've got 8 bags per case, and this is a really easy way for operators to make about 4 to 5 servings per bag, and then they're not opening a giant bag of shrimp every day, and if they don't use it all, they're twisting it and putting back. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback that this is a great format for them to be able to use the product in an efficient way.
Yeah, I'm sure that cuts down on food waste in a big way. You mentioned awareness among the chefs and the cooks. How are you creating awareness besides doing live casts like this or podcasts? Awareness among consumers who may or may not be vegan, but are definitely interested in trying something that they think is a little bit more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in general, the PR around plant-based has been very friendly. So we've had a big, I think, just boost from the media being interested in plant-based over the last few years. So I have to give a lot of credit to a lot of major publications for listening to our story and getting the word out there. We're in with Dot Foods, which is a redistributor. So one of the key ways that we get in with our industry partners is through messaging through our distributors like Dot Foods. They do a really great job of reaching them with the information that we provide them, and working programs with them. So the primary buyers of these products have a lot of awareness about what we're bringing out.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how media has shifted over the last decade, really, to be sort of more aware of and more friendly to these kinds of alternative proteins. And I'm wondering if you think during COVID, because we saw the food system, many eaters saw the food system in a very different way, and they interacted with it in a very different way than they had pre-COVID. Do you think that will, I know it's driving some of the interest in plant-based beef and chicken and other things, do you think it will also have that kind of influence on plant-based seafood?
Oh, absolutely. I think we've seen a huge boost in, as you said, a huge boost in plant-based eating over the last few years. We're in an interesting spot because we're going into food service, and food service has had a very interesting year through COVID, but not everyone has, had a hard time throughout 2020. There have some who weathered it pretty well, and the ones who've weathered it pretty well are the ones who were willing to innovate both before the pandemic and throughout and during. So as things are opening up, the operators are really excited to bring forward some of these foods that people are looking out into their world and saying, "Man, I wish I could do something better," and they're realizing how they eat can be a pathway to that. So operators are very interested in bringing something innovative, good for the environment and good for them. So there's been a lot of interest as restaurants open up more and more to bring in new wave shrimp.
And we were talking about before we went live that, there are really no overnight successes. This took years. It took years for Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat to really get off the ground. What we're seeing now with food service, with New Wave Shrimp, is the culmination of years of R&D and testing and trying and making sure that this product is really worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I started working this back in late 2015, so it's been quite a few years. And there was a little bit of slowdown throughout 2020, but we were really excited to come in strong in 2021. We declared 2021 the year of the plant-based shrimp. And just in terms of my own sort of personal entrepreneur story, what I have found is there are ups and downs every day, all day. I get great AM, I get less than great news at 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. So I found that I really need to be able to ride those ups and downs. And what works for me is staying really connected to friends and family and working out, which has been, hit or miss over the last year. But figuring out those things that just reground me and, like I said, celebrating the wins when they come along, but not getting too thrown by the tough information as it comes in either.
Yeah, that ability to pivot is what makes startups and some nonprofits. I'm not speaking about Food Tank, but maybe like you have to be able to pivot and really, ride with the waves, good and bad, and do it in a way where you don't lose your sense of purpose. And so it sounds like you've been good at that. I'm wondering what you think about the interest, and not from startups, but from the big guys, the big guys and women in this space who are some of the biggest food companies in the world, like Tyson Foods and others, who are sort of hopping on the plant-based protein alternative bandwagon. It's hard to compete because they have so much in terms of not just money, but just the huge place in grocery stores or in restaurants, walk-ins. And I'm wondering how you sort of deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting because I think on the one hand, the more interest there is in plant-based and plant-based seafood, it's sort of, it's going to benefit everyone. And I think this is showing this isn't a fad necessarily, like this is a whole movement and a whole way that we're changing the way we eat on a daily basis. So I think there's a lot of positives to the big guys at least being interested. And what I found, and I think what you'll see with a lot of these larger companies, is they recognize the ability of startups and smaller companies to innovate and innovate quickly. So as much as they do have the resources, there's some work that they do internally, but I've seen a lot of acquisitions happening over the last few years of smaller companies where they're not investing as much as their internal R&D, as much as they're investing in these small companies who are really trailblazing in terms of innovation.
I wondered at the same time if you're worried about policy, because there are a lot of, especially conservative lawmakers who are, sort of in this drive to like not call plant-based milks actually milk, or, calling the Impossible Burger meat. They don't think that's the right thing to do. Are you worried about the policy sort of in place?
I would, yes and no. It's something that we want to understand, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of consumer support behind the plant-based movement that I think the policy will tend to follow the people, if that makes sense. And, we do get some pushback from the industry. And I think what I would say to that is we're looking to really be partners within the industry and work towards a better world together. So I know sometimes that's where a lot of the pushback in policy can be, but I just think, again, with the consumer support, with this movement, and just really taking this, we want a better food system for everyone, it's going to go a long way.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, and I've heard this from other plant-based meat companies, that you're not trying to displace ranchers. It looks like you're not trying to displace all, shrimp farmers or shrimp fishers. You're really trying to be a complement to. This is, not to destroy the whole industry. This is something that's, just part of it.
Exactly. People are looking for more and more plants in their diet for various reasons, and this is a really just delicious way to do it.
And the benefits of seaweed, we're learning more and more about them. And I think that that's kind of, you get that fishy flavor with seaweed as well, that I think is appealing to a lot of people. I'm wondering though, for a lot of consumers, I can imagine where I grew up in Missouri, where shrimp was like something you ate during the holidays and it was something special, that people are like, nah, I'm never going to eat that. And I wonder how you sort of reach reluctant consumers, or if that's even, a sort of a worry in your mind right now.
Yeah, so I'm actually from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's really interesting because whenever I moved out to California to be a part of the plant-based movement, I said, I want to be working on plant-based products. And they said, so you're working on fake fish? Was sort of, and there was silence around the dinner table about what I was, going off and doing. And again, this was around 5 or 6 years ago. And what's been really funny is some of those same family members who kind of looked at me like I had 4 eyes at the time are like, hey, I just went to Burger King and I got an Impossible Burger and I actually really liked it. So this is something that is really going to move inward from the coast, but I've been really surprised even from folks around Pittsburgh who are, starting to venture out or in the early stages of trying some of these plant-based products. So I'm really
mayonnaise, yeah.
Exactly. And also a lot of these landlocked states, who knows what kind of the quality of shrimp that they're getting, and we can guarantee a quality shrimp every single time, no matter what.
No, that's exciting. So, because of your interest in oceans and your real commitment to making sure that mangroves are protected, I wonder if there, you have such a social mission to what you're doing in this ethos. Are there plans to, this is the very beginning, I understand, but are there plans to donate to organizations or particular communities that you would like to see happen?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's something, like you said, we're in the very early stages of looking at, and we want to make sure we're choosing the right partner, really understanding their practices too. And I think over the next few years, as we get through this initial launch, it's something we absolutely want to pay attention to and look at doing.
Absolutely. And I think, if you venture out into the sort of consumer world and you're on retail shelves, there's a lot of education that folks can really learn from the packaging and that kind of thing. I think the more people become interested in the food system, the more they want to know the story of their food.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a big reason also why plant-based foods have been growing over the last few years, is the consumer is so much more aware of where things start off on their plate.
Final question. What's your favorite dish to cook with the New Wave shrimp?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I mean, I have to say I'm really excited. We're coming out with a fried product, and the fried shrimp to me is just such a classic dish. And it is delicious. I think with the product that's out on the market right now, I've actually really liked it in like a marinara sauce, and simmering it for about 20 minutes in the sauce and then putting it over pasta, and having a nice shrimp pasta. That's been really good, or plant-based shrimp pasta.
Sounds great. And where can we find out more about New Wave Foods, Michelle?
Sure. So you can go to www.newwavefoods.com and follow us there. And our social media handles are at New Wave Foods on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
So exciting. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about trying this the next time I go to New York, hopefully. And I want to remind folks that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And I hope folks will join me next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, when I'll be talking to Kim Murata of Molson Coors. Thanks so much, Michelle. Stay safe and well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
You too. Thank you.